Let's go.
Okay. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Take two. Welcome to Emergence 2014 here at Galerie Myrtis. My name is Sharon Burton. I am an art advisor with the Artemista Art Advisory based in Washington, D.C., and one of the jurors, one of 4 jurors that participated in selecting the talented artists that you'll have a chance to meet today as part of the artist talk. So I just want to thank you all for coming out on such a beautiful, kind of cool October. I think we're actually getting into fall now. A little bit about today's format. We're going to actually have an opportunity to see the artworks that each of the artists in this group will be talking a little bit about the works that they have in this show. And then we'll have an opportunity for you to ask some questions about their work. And then we will switch. And the group that's in the front room will come in the back, and we'll have a chance to talk and hear from them, okay? So, to get started, we have several artists with us today. And the first artist, Jeffrey Penn. Come on up here, Jeffrey.
You're not staying up there.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. And Jeffrey is with us, and you're the first artist up.
I truly apologize.
You gotta turn the mic on. You gotta turn the mic on. There we go.
Okay. All right.
It's okay to stand up too.
Okay, so.
And what we're going to do, Jeffrey, is just sort of show your work here on this on the screen there, and if you could just take a minute.
1 minute.
To talk. Yes, we're on a very tight schedule.
Okay, so this painting is informed by the 2008 election during a time when in California, 7 out of 10 African Americans voted to ban rights for other Americans. And it sparked a chord in me that I couldn't control. And it's a mixed media. I used authentic slate pick cotton. It's cotton that is resourced from 19th century furniture that I bought at an auction. Let's see here. And it's a minute up.
Well, and you'll have a chance to talk about it. All right, our next feature is from, and please just introduce your name because I don't know, Kung Chi, right?
It's Chi Kung. Yeah,
Chi
call
Kung.
me Chi. Kung's my last name. I'm originally from Singapore, and my background is in architecture and art. So in this painting here, it's, you can see all the influences that we cannot tell. So part of it is, I think of it as autobiographical. It's a diary, and it's attempt to capture this spontaneity and the creative process, and using vocabulary that I'm still in the process of developing, so straight lines from an architecture, and it's the free-flowing forms of and working with materials. And I start each piece with an accent, which sparks an impetus for further actions, and then I respond to that actions until I find that I step back and sometimes come back a week later to find the right point. And when I sense I cannot add or detract from anymore, then I stop.
Thank you. Thank you. The next work is from Florence McEwen. I don't know if she's here.
She's not going to be here today.
Okay.
Unfortunately, her travels did not match up.
Okay, so we're moving on to Bart O'Reilly. Bart?
Thank you. I'm originally from Ireland. I've been in Baltimore for 11 years. I'm a painter who goes back and forth between painting and making videos. So this is a still from the first piece I made a series of 3 videos last year, based around the idea of this shed that's near my house, and I tend to gravitate towards that place as a source of inspiration. It's usually an older place or something that has a history that I don't know anything about. So I use this shed as a sort of a starting point. Wrote a poem about it while I was making the video. It kind of gave me space to invent my own history, and kind of a personal narrative, which, if you stick your headphones on over there, you'll hear the poetry that goes with the video. So, is that a minute? Yes.
Okay, our next one is Harvey Smith.
Hi. My name is Bart Smith. I'm a professor emeritus from Pacific Northwest College of Art in Portland, Oregon. And this is my work over here, Cigarette Dude and Mr. Case. And for some time now, several years, I've been investigating slavery in Maryland, slavery in Baltimore. I did a show with some people here at the Reginald Lewis Museum about slavery in Baltimore. And so these kind of reflect what the dominant culture thinks of African Americans as I see it from my research. The Cigarette Dude, we were after slavery, after Reconstruction, we were. Oh, when is that?
We'll talk.
Okay.
All right. Our next is Antar Spearman. Oh no, not over
That's
there.
nice.
Not here.
It's very nice.
Casey's not here either. Okay, there we go.
Hello everyone, my name is Antar Spearman. I am an electrical engineer by trade. I think that comes through with my work. I like to focus on, or being an engineer, I focus on things like form, balance, linear structures, and composition, and I think that translates into my work. I like to think that straight lines are not necessarily boring. They can always dip, dive, change, and be dynamic. I like to bring that in my work. I always try to focus on, my art. I like to have it on multiple canvases, just showing that art is kind of expansive. If you get one spark of inspiration, it kind of goes from there and it just goes up. I like to translate that into my art.
Hello. My name is Scheherazade Tawani, and this is one of my pieces here. It's a series of pieces that I've created. I've created about 50 pieces, different sizes. And basically, everybody thinks it's glass, but it's not. It's actually plexiglass from recycled candy machines that I've collected. And they're from like the gumball machine domes that are sort of becoming obsolete now. And I create art as a means to sort of like escape from reality, kind of. So I like creating pieces that represent aesthetic beauty and also inward beauty. And what I mean by that is sort of like a poetic romance or a poetic sort of like sentiment. And I like to use vibrant colors. I think that it represents my passion for life. And my pieces are very spiritual by nature. Thank you.
We're going to go back to Linda Smith work, who's with us. Linda.
Hi, apologize, I got traffic.
Yeah.
But I am a wood sculptor. I use my local wood. I don't use exotic woods. I like it's native to the area. This particular piece is a boxwood that I found in Alexandria. It was perfectly round, it was wonderful, energetic, and I thought, well, I want to, and I always try to juxtapose nature. And natural form is what's the most important thing in my art. And so then I create some kind of a geometric, finely finished cabinet-making base. What here is really a triangular form out of black walnut, and lifts up that form. So the natural form is always at eye level, and all of my sculptures, much of the thought is creates what kind of geometric form am I going to do to lift the natural form?
Thank you, Linda. Okay, so we're going to go forward, and we are going to hear next from Terry. Can you pass the mic?
All right, I'm originally from Kentucky. I've been living in New York City for a number of years. Originally a labor, trade worker, or whatever you call it. I've done a number of jobs. This work, like most of my work, is really about mythologies, and not mythologies in the sense of a positive investigation of our mythology, but the way we use meaning to destroy meaning in our contemporary age, a lack of meaning, an end of history, a collusion of historical complexities. This one was built in thinking of alternate histories that we could have had, the insistence rather than the existence of the storyline. So I try to make the monumental. The second companion to this is actually all the writing is in Hittite, cuneiform, but it looks like 1970s comic book covers. Something could have been dug up in sooner or when we bombed Iraq.
Okay, next is Maxine Taylor.
Hello, my name is Maxine Taylor, and this piece is representative of how I work intuitively. I'm interested in communicating feelings, and I want to communicate to my audience that way, so it's difficult for me to talk about. That's all.
Okay, Stanley Winnicott.
Thanks, I'm Stan Winokur, and I'm a relatively local artist from Colombia. The piece that you see here is sort of typical of the way I work. It involves a deconstruction process and a reconstruction process. So that piece began with a piece of wood, and then covered with cement, and then covered with satin fabric, and then covered with paint, which I then took apart. And as I stripped off the fabric, I used the fabric to create another piece, which is collaged on some illustration board. So my typical way of working is to deconstruct and reconstruct work. And inspiration comes from different sources, nature in particular, but also sometimes the political world and what's going on around us.
And see, is she with us?
I'm here.
Okay. Oh, hi. I didn't get a chance to meet you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. This is sea, like ocean, sea. Yeah. Okay. That is not my artwork. Yes, that is mine. Okay, so The thing is Welcome Stranger, and basically it's a picture that I made, that I saw through my vision. So I sketched images, actual images in my sketchbook, and they're usually altered through my vision, which has a lot of busy patterns and vibrant colors. When I first came to US for the first time, I went to a local small candy shop. My daddy took me there, and that vivacity and bright colors, sort of like, I was very shocked. There's not such thing in Korea. And then it sort of exists in my mind very strongly, and every single time I see something, it sort of like replaces and affects my vision. So if basically somebody came to my house and opened the door, and opened, and that's how I fell from my altered vision, but not in actual reality. But through that inventive reality, it's no longer imagination, but my inventive reality through my vision.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Helen.
Thank you. What's the spirit of axe chopper? So yeah, this is my, thank you very much. I'm Helen. This is my piece called Veiled Secrets. And I've written in Arabic an Iraqi proverb over and over and over again that translates, there are many secrets hidden under the abaya, which is the covering that a lot of people in the Middle East wear. And this is from a series I did called Changing Perceptions. After we went into war in Iraq, and the abaya began to become a negative stereotype, so I try and deflect that and make you see it in a different way. And this woman, either she's emerging from what the abaya is or being submerged. And I open that dialogue.
Let's give everyone another round of applause. Okay, I'm going to ask a few questions and then open it up to the audience for the remainder of the time. And I'm going to pick on the artists as I see fit. So y'all need to be ready. Okay, my first question is what drives your use of materials? And I'm going to start with C.
Okay.
When you have some very interesting work in that you use a lot of different colors. I don't know if I can bring it back up. There it is. Oh, and it's up there, so you don't have to see it.
Right.
Real time, but tell us a little bit about the materials that you used in this, and why did you choose those materials?
Okay, I use tempera cake. It has the strong pigment that is very vibrant and bright. It is not necessarily bright. Alright, so I use tempera cake. It's called tempera cake. It has bright colors, and the reason is I've used a lot of different materials, expensive materials, oil painting, but it's just not what really expressed my feeling. So in my imagination, I close my eyes and think about it. Only the material that can allow me to express that vibrant colors and that strong, intense hue is the intense pigment in tempera cake. That's why that's the only medium that allows me to express my idea and that colors that I saw in my vision.
And if you could pass the mic to Linda. And with Linda being a sculptor, what drives your use of the materials that you use, and the material particularly for this show? I'll try to bring it up.
Well, I love nature, and I grew up in South America, and being in nature, being the trees, playing with sticks, those were my forms of solace growing up. And so I just really, when I come across a natural form that kind of hits me in the face and stimulates my imagination, then that's when I work with the wood Black walnut is a very valued wood. I use a lot of black walnut. People call me, give me their trees, and so it just is something that I love, is working with wood. And I tried to, yesterday I was in my studio and I was trying to do it in clay, the form I'm thinking of, and I just had to put it aside because I have to work directly on the wood. And I cut it, I sand it, I shape it, and then it directs me as to the form and the sculpture I'm going to make.
Let's go to Bart. Now Bart uses video, right?
Yeah.
And some of his work is to your right. Why do you use video? What is it about that medium that you choose for your artistic expression?
Well, I'm very interested in light, as coming from a painting background, and starting by making paintings that observe light phenomena. I found that I could really track the movement of light, and the sequential nature of video allowed me to make these time-lapse recordings in my studio where the light is controlled by me, but it sort of shifts and alters the perception of the objects that you're looking at. So that video is just it's a direct way to work with light for me.
So you see light as your main kind of use for...
Yeah, light and then place and the materials I find in places. They'd be the three, I guess, muses that would be there.
Thank you.
Okay.
And I think, Anton, let's hear from you. What medium did you use for your work here, and what drives that?
So I used acrylic for this piece here, and for the majority of my pieces have been all acrylic, but I'm really just starting out, and so I'm kind of exploring. So I will just go into a paint store for a good hour and just try different materials. So that is painted on gesso board, which is kind of like a wooden, I guess, refactored canvas, but it's primarily wood. Kind of just stumbled upon it, found that I liked working with it, and a lot of my other pieces have been just a growth from that. So I'm not locked into any one particular thing. I'm just open to trying to see where my creativity will take me.
Experimental.
Right.
Okay. My next question is, how do you choose the imagery for your work? And I think I'll start with my good friend here, Jeff, now that he's caught his breath.
Could you repeat that question?
Imagery. How do you choose your imagery for your work? And you started to tell us a little bit about the piece that you have in the show, which was driven by some political events.
How do I choose imagery? I guess through my investigation and research, depending on what I'm trying to convey. In this particular case, I was trying to use this particular body of work as a reminder to those who forget their history. And so the images were specific to historical relevance, where you have the minstrel characters, when there was a time when this was really looked upon as a very bad occupation. But for those who did it was a way of life and a way to make a living. And it was a use of entertainment. And I also was creating a parallel to the evangelical community in California who were proponents for banning rights for other Americans who had a history for trying to have civil rights. So I had to be specific in the imagery to convey what I was trying to remind those who forget.
So this image I have found myself using over and over and over again. This figure of Nehemiah. Can you guys hear me? And as an Arab American, and not caring about religion one way or the other, actually, but this abaya image, especially after Iraq, got in the media in such a negative way. And I began, as I said earlier, this series called Changing Perceptions, where I mixed well-recognized Western artists like Picasso and Mondrian with the abaya to form another image of what that means to a woman, and to change somebody's perception about what it means to color. I know a lot of people in the West think that it's what's the word, oppressive, or patriarchal, or forced on a woman. That is not necessarily true. And there are many ways to look at that. And so what I was trying to do was change this image that people in the West have of Arab women who wear the abaya. And as I said, this is an Iraqi proverb. And I love the idea of the secrets hidden under, and I think that even goes beyond of whether or not you're an Arab woman that wears the abaya or not. Women in general, what secrets we hold and what stories that we have. And we're more interesting than men. So, anyways, I just think there's so many layers, and with the writing here, normally my work is quite bright. Like you, I use strong color, I use gouache actually, and it's a little bit of a departure for me to use black and white, but I felt that it translated so well into this piece with the words sort of making you feel as if the woman, her fabric is moving and swaying, and actually underneath a lot of these abayas, what's secretly hidden are like mini skirts and Victoria's Secrets, and all kinds of stuff that you could never, ever expect.
That's interesting for many of us to know.
Yeah, it is.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Terry, did we talk to you? Oh, we did talk to you. Ask you a question. Stanley. Tell us about your use of imagery. You do abstract, and how do you choose the imagery that you use for much of your work?
Well, I don't begin. I begin with something on the canvas or on the paper, and it has to develop. For me, the art process is a very developmental process. And so their images sometimes are clear in my head and sometimes they're not clear, and they have to develop. And they develop around texture and color and lines, and usually are reflective of nature in some way, of fleeting images, but also sometimes they're reflective of, as I mentioned before, of the political world and the world that's going on around us. So reconstructing things, for example, really touches on the sort of part of the process, it touches on the ecology movement, but also it's built into my process. Some people have accused me of being a sensualist, because it's not just the image, but it's also the texture. I'm interested in touching and feeling in different ways. Usually people get that out of the work that I do.
And Chi.
It's a very intuitive process. You know, I start out with the images that I bring back to the studio with me from the day, the newspaper article that's on the web, documentary about explosion, would be a nice picture of a cloud. They kind of start with that, but you never know where you're going to end up. Because it takes you somewhere, and then I like to play with the material, and then I work with acrylic, and it has this essential element about it. It flows, and you can make it thick, and you can make it really fluid, and then it leads me somewhere else, and I come back the next day, and then I see a nice building, and then, or building under construction, and that could be integrated and work well with what I have, or if not on this piece, on another piece. And then I step back and then come back the third day, depending on, so it's kind of building a diary of what I see every day. And then until at some point you realize that, oh, it's enough now, it's got enough. It looks interesting, it's a balance, but it's not entirely complete. I want to leave something that's incompleteness, imperfection. Because there are some pieces where I push it too far and becomes balanced, and it's totally resolved, and it stops being interesting. That's how it evolved over time.
I was sort of noticing how all the artists were nodding their head.
Yeah.
Including me, I'm an artist too. Thank you. All right, we're going to open it up to the audience. If you have a question, are we going to use the mic for questions? Or?
No, you know, it's a little bit hard. Just speak up if you have a question. Leave the mic on that side.
And if there's a particular artist that you want to address your question to, feel free.
Yeah, when I see the one in Galerie, that totally reminds me of Yellow Submarine Beatles. Yeah. I just wanted to let you know that, well, looking at your age, you would never know about that. But, yeah, I was like, wow, when I saw that, I'm like, oh, Yellow Submarine. Did you ever heard of the movie?
Yes, but I never thought about it when I was making that. But I'm so glad that somebody who's looking at my painting is making connection with their personal experience, with whether it's personal experience or another type of experience, because it's definitely from my personal experience and through my vision too. So we are making connection, and that way I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Just to follow up, because that's sort of, pop or, rock or music culture. Does that influence your work at all?
I haven't really thought about it, but the more I think about it, I have mixed background culture because I was born in Korea, but all my rest of my families most of them were born here. Okay. And I immigrated to America where I saw the candy shop and more like open media, less conservative. I will say honestly more freedom really. And I went to Japan, I went to Philippines, like many Asian countries, but less likely Europe and like American. So I was definitely exposed to many different cultures, and it was definitely shocking when I was introduced to all this media and all this, like, I just thought it was really fancy when I came here. More than fancy, I didn't even know how to describe it. So definitely rock or contemporary freedom. Vivid, really, like the bright colors and how, like, well, I mean, like, look, even in our harbor, like how expensive it is, how bright it is. Sometimes I think we take it for granted, but it's so beautiful just by looking at it. So definitely I get a lot of inspiration and influence from that. It was just that local candy shop where I got all my inspiration.
That's awesome. Thank you. Questions? Yes.
I was hoping the gentleman from Portland could finish his discussion about you were talking about slavery in Maryland and how that influenced your work.
Okay. 4 years ago, I believe. Anyway, I did this show in Maryland, and at the original Lewis Museum for African American Art and Culture, and I have a piece there.
And in the research, I discovered that the word slavery is slowly being eased out of the dialogue. We're now servants, but we weren't servants. Like he was talking about, if you wanted a job, you had to be Stephen Fetch. But he was an actor. We built this place. I look at some of the buildings. I taught at the Maryland Institute. The Maryland Institute was built by slaves. I look at all these buildings around here. They were built by us. But when I go to the Inner Harbor, I see me with the mop and the white guy in the suit. I said, something's wrong with this. And that's what I talked about in my work. I talked about Black and Cigarette Dude. I just finished doing some work with kids in juvenile hall. We did a series of murals about just incarceration. And what we have is lots of incarceration of Black youth, Latino youth, and just a little bit of education. So we need a lot more education, a little less incarceration. So I'm looking, so when I came to do this show in Maryland, I started in the research. I found out, well, the Marlboro Man wasn't really from, from wherever. He's from, we grew tobacco in here, but it was so labor intensive that after slavery was over, they no longer needed us. So they shipped us down south to New Orleans and so forth. I noticed here in Maryland we have a Holocaust museum, but I didn't see anything about the slave market. There was a very, very large slave market here in Baltimore that we don't seem to even know about. My work is about, we will not always be underdogs, but sort of what if. But I'm also saying, I know what you're doing. I know it's done through the advertising, and it continues. You can look at, if you know what to look for, it's there. It's there at McDonald's. It's everywhere. I bought an old Ebony magazine, 1975, and a Black guy with shaving cream on, Gillette, with the big lips. That's what it was, if you're looking at that. But if you're looking at shaving cream, you're seeing shaving cream. But this is how this is perpetuated through these little subtle things. There's nothing about advertising that's accidental. So we get this, but people don't know what they're looking at because we haven't been taught to look at that sort of thing. It's just assumed that because you're Black, well, what are you doing in our store? that sort of thing. You kind of get tired of people following you around the stores and all of those little indignities that we as African Americans face daily, minute by minute. And so this is what I work about. This guy that we think of as the guy who's back in the alley playing dice or, trafficking women, that sort of thing is what we're sort of, what people think of when they think of Black people, and, especially African American men. And the women were either mammies or they were Jezebels. Just plain old folks, just plain folks. I grew up in Texas in my formative years, way back in the South. And I didn't understand why these people wouldn't let me walk down the street as a child, why I couldn't eat at certain places as a child. And this is how it continues. They start with the children. They start before the children, in the womb. and then it continues and continues and continues, and that's what I think.
And all kinds of historical information here in stuff. One more question, yes.
I have a question for Terry, please.
Yes.
When you talk about your work, there's this intensity in your voice, but it doesn't come through in your work. And I'm wondering, how do you work that out so that, I mean, when I look at your work, I see the colors and it looks very soothing. It kind of draws you in. Just wondering, how do you reconcile the not putting that in your work? In other words, when I hear you talk, I'm thinking dark grays and I'm thinking a lot of black, but when I look at the work, it's not there. So I'm wondering, do you intentionally leave that out?
It kind of depends on which work you look at. I mean, like this particular
Yes.
work, I wanted almost carnival-like colors.
Okay.
When it was this thought of, like I said, an atomic bomb of imagery blasting off, and I was looking at a lot of fairground art, a lot of French carnivals from the 1890s, things like that. But I wanted almost, like if you look at some of the work that's online, some of the times it goes to a very, like you said, where the color and the form, the composition mirrors that sort of dark feel. Sometimes I work against it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense with that. Thank you.
This one was definitely against it.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Well, I just want to thank you all. I want to thank all of the artists for not only submitting your work, because if you didn't submit, we would not have seen it. So we want to let you know that we appreciate you doing that. But also for you all did such an awesome job explaining your work. You know, me as an artist, sometimes it's hard when I put my artist down. As an artist, sometimes it's hard to explain where you were when you did a certain piece. You know, sometimes it's experimental. Sometimes it's from a historical, social, political situation. Sometimes it's just imagery that you find yourself inspired by just being in a candy store. You know? Here, we just heard a wonderful history lesson. And that's the power of art. You know, art can do all of the above. It can inspire, it can soothe. Somebody mentioned the colors and this work here. And, it can do so much. The power of art is really awesome and something to be respected. And you all really mastered that. So we just want to thank you for sharing a little bit about your work and answering the questions and all that good stuff. So let's give them another round of applause. And I've been asked that everyone stay seated for just a moment.